And thanks for staying with us here on Morning Live. Now, the resignation of South African Airways Chief Executive Officer Vuyani Jarana has put the state of the country's parastatals back in the spotlight. Jarana's resignation has been attributed to, among other things, a lack of progress on a strategy and the turnaround of the loss-making airline. Now, this comes on the back of Eskom CEO Phakamani Hadebe's announcement that he's stepping down. In studio with us now, the president of the Black Management Forum, Andile Nomlala, for some reaction to these developments. Thanks for coming through. Now, as the BMF, you say that you are shocked at these resignations. Why exactly are you shocked?
Morning, Sakina. Morning to your listeners. Look, it comes as a shock that you would have two seasoned senior executives leaving the fray because of what Vuyani has clearly stated in his resignation letter, which is, amongst other things, the structural difficulties that are systematic, that comes with the governance parameters that you find in state-owned enterprises. So, as BMF, we feel that this is an unattainable position, and we believe that if it's not addressed, then we're not going to get into a situation where these state-owned enterprises are functioning optimally. The reasons that we put forward when we call our people to not apply for these positions is that up until government has figured out what they want to do with these state enterprises, whether they want to save them, whether they want to privatize them, up until they figure out what they want to do, then they must, for now, decide what do they want to do with them. So as BMF, we are saying that the entire governance framework, from both legislation and even the regulatory that you find, PMFA, one of the reasons you find it's constraining the agility and the ability of these companies and executives to function optimal. So we're saying that that situation is not attainable, and we want a solution where government can clearly define these parameters, can clearly define the capital structure of these state-owned entities. They can clearly define the mandate of the rejuvenation of these state-owned entities, can clearly define the funding models that would apply across these state entities before we send our people to a bottomless pit where they would come back battered and their careers diminished.
So before I ask you what you deem the solution to possibly be, you say that the PFMA places its own constraints on the operations of these SOEs. How so?
Look, the limiting factor is that the processes that needs to be followed to make decisions, it's very difficult. Take an example here at SABC. It will take you 8 months to take a very basic broadcasting decision, and you are expected to compete with a multi-choice that takes decisions overnight. Naturally, the fact that you are a public broadcaster, which we need to understand that you're serving a public mandate, but at the same time you need to operate optimally at a corporate level so that the business is sustainable and the business is profitable. And those two brings a very complex conundrum for executives in these state entities to decide how do they operate. So we're not saying we must do away with the triple PMFA, but we must identify the clauses that impede the governance processes to move with speed and to move with agility, so that these entities can compete on an equal footing with the other entities that you find in our country.
Which ones have you identified as being impediments to progress?
Look, as I've said, we had a discussion with the SAA executives and the board the other day. They did clearly identify the procurement of aircrafts was a very difficult. The decision making on the routes that needs to be abandoned, it takes forever. The routes that are loss making, it takes forever. Those decisions don't just generally lie on them, and all those in the meantime give space and opportunity to competing airlines like Ethiopian Airlines to cannibalize and take the market from SAA, and the functionality of SAA becomes difficult. Vuyani Jarana himself has explained it quite comprehensively in his resignation letter, the difficulties, the governance difficulties that he had to face for him to succeed. What is worse is that we find it very abnormal that government doesn't clearly state exactly what they need to do to infuse and put in capital for these state entities. Vuyani went there, developed a solid, comprehensive strategy, that needs a backing of government financially. Now, then that money was not coming forth. Now the question is, what exactly do they want to do with SAA? What exactly do they want the executive to do? Do they expect them to perform miracles and make these companies functioning out of Holy Spirit? Or whether do they want to find funding models and mechanisms that can make these state-owned enterprises functional and be functioning optimally so that they can service and continue to serve the purpose that they are there for?
So as the BMF, do you have any solutions forthcoming? Because the IMF were here, the International Monetary Fund, and they were saying essentially, we are in a dire state, constrained by these SOEs. They are placing some great pressure on our fiscus and our fiscal outlook, but also they also noted that South African government cannot keep throwing money at these SOEs and the problems that they face. So what sort of solution do you have in mind?
Look, BMF exists for exactly that, because we're a professional body. We have expertise, skills within our membership that can come forth. One of the key things that we're proposing, as you have seen on our 6 points that we requested that must be dealt with, is that it's high time now we sit down with government as a matter of agents and define exactly these parameters that I've spoken about. It starts with governance processes that needs to be optimal, that needs to be to the T, before you can even think about putting in money. The other critical things is that government has to make a call. Before we can be able to make the proper intervention, government has to decide whether they want to save these state-owned enterprises or they want to privatize them, so that our own thinking as professionals can be based on what government's vision and view of these state-owned enterprises should be. Our belief is that...
If you look at, and I'm sorry to interject there, what's happening at the moment, and one of the reasons cited for why some of the SOEs can't be bailed out is the appropriations bill. And, it seems as though some of these things take forever to be finalized. How do you suggest government expedites this?
Look, as much as they take forever to finalize, and these state-owned enterprises are continuing to bleed, the reality is that before you know it, you're going to have an SAA that is grounded. Before you have seen it when Eskom couldn't produce electricity, and you're going to one day wake up with SABC that is shut down. So government needs to come to the fore here, and I know that it's not like they are not trying, but this time around they need to talk to industry experts. They need to find these suitable black professionals. Even, by the way, in their own executives, I'm confident with some of the executives I've seen here at SABC, at SAA, even at Eskom, we had competent people, but the problem is the supporting structure that sits with the decision makers about these entities. The funding models and mechanisms, believe me, we have top corporate finance professionals within the BMF that can suggest that, but you can't come up with a corporate finance strategy before somebody decides exactly what do they want to do. Here, the question that we're sitting with is that government must make a call and decide what they want to do, and then BMF would convene a colloquium that would make the interventions, where we would convene top professionals in all these industries, particularly the SOEs that are in ICU. We're talking SABC, we're talking Eskom, we're talking PRASA, we're talking SAA. All those state-owned enterprises are on the verge of collapse. There's likelihood that salaries of black professionals, by the way, are not going to be paid. There's likelihood of black businesses not being paid. So we can't then stand by and keep quiet when we see that there is no urgency and the immediate intervention that deals with these things.
Well, thank you so much. Andile Nomlala, President of the Black Management Forum, talking to us about developments at the country's state-owned enterprises, and this, of course, following the resignation of both the SAA and Eskom CEOs. Well, that brings us up to news time with Leanne.